Chili here with Sirius Dallas Moon. Saturn's hour. You know what? I don't usually record on Saturn hour, but I will. Ascendant is and being heaven ruled by Jupiter. It's my lunar return, so let's try it. I'm gonna call on Dan Amalgady for this topic, and this topic has to do with Rahu Sedna eclipses. We had the Rahu Sedna eclipses around midway into COVID, which were profound, where people had to deal with the root of betrayal as sexual boundary violation in the pre-verbal phase, which, as I am speaking, gives me a gnosis about beta per se, which is the pre-verbal stage, is Taurus, both sidereally and tropically. And we're going to have in 2030, we're going to have another Rahu Sedna, another, not Rahu Sedna, but Ketu Sedna. We're going to have a nodal Sedna conjunction. This is in parallel with attempts to reconsider the religious foundations of legislation, whether it's Ottoman law, Christian law, any type of pre-monotheistic laws, reconsidering caste system in India, Judaic law, and let's call on Dan Amalgady for that, because the Rahu Sedna eclipses that we had 2021 around the COVID, they exposed that the pre-verbal phase type of violations to the life energy that can be in spirit and in matter. It can be rituals that are done, let's say, I don't know, in the city or in the country, and affect infants even though they weren't present in the rituals. And then what happens is that there is a pre-verbal stage damage that could affect to the non-physical. For some people, could affect to the physical. Cause a lot of the issue, from avoidance to hypersexuality to anomalies in erotic desire that we see with sexual boundary violation, particularly in the early phase, the childhood phase, let alone the pre-linguistic phase or the infant phase. And then people expect people to have consistent monogamies. Now, the nodes with Sedna, both nodes with Uranus, nodes with Sedna, they pinpoint to a fated experience. For example, let's say a person could have been, as far as they knew themselves, sex avoidant. They wouldn't date people, they wouldn't. And then if people would try to even flirt with them and they weren't available, they would be like pondering, like, if their person is not monogamous, they're not monogamous, what do they even want? Then they become more aware of, let's say, the astral, and they're like, wait a second, there's something here is not completely the energy. Now, if a person since infanthood never felt their own energy as completely their energy, the discernment can take decades. And things can be only in the aftermath, and then, wait a second. Now, both violations can happen there, and people may even try to. Taurus is what? The sign of? What do we call May? If Scorpio month, if November is Decentering Men month or Sexual Transmutation month, then Taurus is self-pleasure mate. If a person tries to self-pleasure and they're not with only them in their body, and then let's say they have something that was approximate of experience that was the closest to, let's say, something that they would enjoy. Rahu Sedna can give us, or Uranus Sedna, Uranus Rahu. Rahu transit can give us that whoops, and then we're basically dealing with a person that has been what, sex avoidant, boom, in a most intimate interaction that they don't even know if is real and don't have the capacity to manage. They're basically experiencing something where they try to find themselves within a situation or not. Basically, something that in a terrible way can also re traumatize. Even if experience was partially good or juxtapose that with people that consciously do rituals, sex magic, astral projection, and live in a completely different world of concepts. Now, why am I mentioning this particular thing and not, I don't know, Uranus said now, Uranus people, people having that, oh, it just happened, which is the kind of Uranus thing. Because this was the deacon of the spirit and matter. And it was also the deacon of Beta per se. Beta per se story is the infant story of the pre-linguistic phase. I think I'm the first astrologer that talks about this. Horrible circumstances. I do not prescribe to anybody to have those circumstances of um, revolutionizing astrology, particularly around the fixed stars. Totally shifting how we see Beta per se. Not getting that will cause the jurisdiction, whether it's Islam, Judaic, Christian, Indian, any type of juristic, to collapse upon itself in the most horrible ways. I'm talking concentration camps, death camps, colonialism, genocide, democide, depopulation. For example, if one would think, how could anybody collapse the state of Israel? Get them, like, if they don't get that, they collapse from within. What is the pyrus been there? They collapse with the entire world. Now, to a person that has been, let's say, in a relationship. Now, Taurus, Scorpio, except for the Uranus part, can have the striving to be close with one another. And even with Scorpio, Scorpios can both be the open marriage, but they can also be why the open marriage, particularly the last decan of Scorpio, where they are like aware of the scorpionic tendencies. Like, I'm not gonna expect something that is highly unrealistic to happen consistently. But for others, they might be at the juncture or the phase where they're like, oh, there's this one person and so on. So they themselves might not be so completely monogamous as they portray themselves to be. it is, we're told is usually the case. But the wish to be and the depth of emotion and the this fixed time and the possessiveness and everything associated with that. Now, for that person that was, let's say, in the relationship, it can be re-traumatizing to the same core trauma that all of the, let's say, triad people if it's a triad, if it's non-monogamy, it can be more than triad, are a part of ritual abuse affecting the pre-verbal phase of an infant. Rahu said now. Beta per se. Once in 12 millennia can't continue with any of the juristic misconceptions of any of the religions, monotheistic or not, doing anything in the way that was done before, not taking this into account and expecting to not be colonized, exiled, genocided, democided. Not even Prophet Amos and Prophet Jeremiah got that particular thing. Now why? It's once in 12 millennia. They did not live in these times. You say, Shuli, how come you got that point? Well, I have a lot of family there. It's a midpoint for me. Think about, and that was not even Uranus said now. Uranus said, I still have partial recollection of Uranus said. It's now 2030 we're going to have Ketu Sedna. Co-present with Uranus, not conjuncting Uranus, but co-present with Uranus. Ketu Sedna is going to touch on these points, but with the connection to trade. Think about the fact, and I say this to people that I venerate and appreciate. Arranged marriage is human trafficking, is child trafficking, is infant trafficking. At the harm of the ritual was happening at the language development stage. Think about the stuttering of Ehud Barak. My weird accents, I have Chiron Gemini. Habermas, weird, not really stuttering, but weird pronunciation, Chiron Gemini. And by the way, I was the person that learned a little bit of linguistics in the room where we read Habermas. So people not coming from linguistics would have more difficulty understanding Habermas. Of course, the Chiron Gemini was explaining Habermas. I got professors that were Renaissance people looking at me dumbfounded. Not a matter of genius yet, just came from linguistics, and I also have Chiron Gemini. And then I made them read a 30-page essay of uniting Habermas and Rawls, which is the veil of ignorance and the most acknowledgement of identity, closer to the identity politics, but in discourse, acknowledging of the different contributions of the monotheistic religions, and how listening to people and taking them into account in the discourse is imperative for having a political discussion. Okay, veil of ignorance basically means that we don't know who is, that we try to think about the structure, think about Lady Justice as the veil of ignorance. Okay, the veiled lady that holds the scale and needs to balance the scale, being blind of the identity of the what is 12 from Libra? Aries, the identity of the people standing in the court or in the court of decision. And trying to see where do the scale get odd. Where the scale get odd is like, oh, that right is heavier. While Habermas noting at, wait a second, a person coming from Judaic tradition that has the principle of jury, and Christian tradition that has the principle of mercy, would be seeing the world in completely different points of view. And I know there is Bet Hillel, Bet Shammai, okay, the more restricting, the less restricting, but still the principle of mercy is crossing jurisdiction into completely different arena. Now when we have a discourse, we need to understand where do these people come from, what point do they bring to the table, and how do we combine that to something that people can eventually agree with. Now, a lot of Chiron Geminis are having their anomaly in speech just where it frictions with anything that would require them to basically understand an etiquette and be subjugated to it. The Chiron Geminis are having their Uranus opposition right now. Some of them maybe the Uranus return, but Uranus, particularly Chiron Gemini, that I'm talking about having the Uranus opposition. And Gemini has what? No filter. Now, Ketu said now that we'll have to purge, dematerialize any type of human trafficking and the rituals that are the onsets from the practice, because Mercury is also applied, and from the jurisdiction, procedure, and trade agreements. Failing to do that can collapse the world at unprecedented levels. Now, this is a very big, how should I say, warning sign. Why? Remember what I said about the fate of the woman. Anybody that would treat particularly those marginalized by this is going to have the fate of the woman. Now, the laws weren't looking very pretty. Okay? And the context with Neptune Aries is the veil of ignorance, the fog around the identities. Now, what else do we have in 2030? 1325 is having Saturn return with Saturn, Mars, Lilith conjoining around Beta Persei, ruling what? Pluto and Neptune. Ain't nobody gonna be able to say that they didn't know they didn't know. We had the Me Too. We had the war in Ukraine. We had the 7th of October. We had Israel thinking it's the Palestinians when it was the French. We had the world has had the time to adapt to zero rape society or total extinction. Now it sounds like utopia. I have Moon square Aries. What it means is, if I was a physicist, the best analogy would be the part in Epstein, where he predicted the principle of probability regarding quantum, the relativity, and he says that can't be. Some people associate that God does not play chess with the universe, maybe plays checkers. That would be Chris Carter. Thinking back to the childhood, not understanding anything now. Surf, surf. Anyway, millennials having a moment. Anyway, I had difficulty to accept what I'm telling you. Me Too after. Epstein drop after. That thing about the Rolodex, what they did to Dedru a month before the Epstein drop. Okay? Neptune's gonna get to that particular degree. Yet again, to 1 degree Aries. I'm dumbfounded. If somebody would have told me, Shirley, but can't you see that any type of sexual boundary violation at any age can cause inflammation that can cause all the way to cancer and neurodegenerative diseases, and is completely antithetical to, let's say, intergenerational wealth that stays consistent throughout the 4th generation. Now you're going to tell me, Shirley, what about the Windsors? I don't know. But do think about one thing. Not Candida, the guy who wrote Candide. Voltaire escaped France during the French Revolution to England. Why? Because they were more tolerant of freedom of religion. Now, the French casted away the church. But Voltaire had more freedom, and Voltaire wasn't Christian. So, a person of the word escaped France to England due to freedom of speech. Okay? Not in all centuries does it look like tantric multi-orgasm that manifests worldly utopia. Solar panels on the roof making lots of the air. Okay? Sometimes it looks like a Frenchman escaping to England for the sake of freedom of speech. Why? What? Because who was Voltaire to the French back then? The woman! Mason logic. That's a part of how the Windsor made it. Monty Python. They say, oh, but Monty Python, they are minions and this and that. Like, would it be possible? Did we have Monty Python in Islam? I've begged that questions a couple of years ago as well. We had the Jews are coming, which was controversial. We had Monty Python for the Christians. The Jews are coming for the Israelites. The Jews. Do we have an equivalent for Islam? So who is going to sustain the coming millennia? Here is a tip for you. Everything that crosses Leo has a Me Too effect or an Epstein files drop effect. Looking at what will cross Leo in the coming century. We're going to have Uranus crossing Leo. We're going to have in the next century, probably going to have Neptune crossing Leo. We're going to have Saturn crossing Leo, Chiron, of course. Around 150 years from now, we're going to have Pluto crossing Leo. So the next century, the 2300s, are going to be very fascinating. Now, of course, now we have Pluto opposing Leo. But you say, but Chile, Pluto opposing Leo was the witch hunts. Even Jeanne d'Arc had to pretend she's a man and then was tortured with the man. What was the wealth redistribution about? Land. What is land? Who were the countries that kept the land? Those that abolished slavery. What, or alternatively, those that facilitated social rights to everyone. France. They say, but what about, let's say, capitalism or worldly trade? Everything goes if we make sure that the sexuality is honoring erotic, non-erotic self, willing consent, withdrawn consent. Taking into account esoterics, taking into account the infant phase, taking into account technology, culture, fraternites. You can do that with capitalism, you can do that with capitalism, you can do that with communism, you can do that with whatever. If you can do that, you have appeased the Sedna. But you have also appeased the Leo. Now what's associated with Leo Regulus? The Empire. Is it my personal opinion? It's not about, let's just say, that my values coincide with it is because I have second house Aries. Aries is the logos. What is the most aries thing? Immanuel Kant questioning what would be if everybody would act in this particular way. If everybody was allowed to rape, what would happen? Global pandemic. Why? Sense of self violated is what? Now, in jurisdiction, we have the principle of the soft skull. What is the principle of the soft skull? It's by praxis Neptune Aries. The soft skull says certain people, let's say a man dates a girl. That girl is a little bit on the Libra side. She's a little bit people pleasing. In that case, she was harmed by that man's advances, even though he did not intend to rape her. The principle of the soft skull means that that man will have to make sure that he will take into account the prospective other being way less assertive. By what means, by what dividends should he pay compensation? The core principle is that whatever is the result of the jurisdiction, that person will not cross that line with another person again, even when that other person is the soft skull principle. When a person wasn't that assertive, or either was people pleasing, or even was previously violated and had an experience when their no didn't matter, so they were afraid to say no, and they acted with the freeze phone and so on. Now, sense of self, loss of sense of self, what else causes? Inflammation. Neptune is viral. Viral inflammation is what? A plague. Unless we have that type of volcanic eruption where only the CO2 goes out and then it kind of, people go to sleep and don't wake up and they have all kind of like bubbles on their skin. It happened. CO2 emissions in volcanoes. It's volcanoes are the Neil the Seal of CO2 emissions. Now that was a volcanic eruption without magma. Basically without that goo that become basalt. um, but this is not about what somebody would like there to happen in the world, because do I know how things will come about? I don't know. Do I want to look into possibilities? No, I'd rather have my sushi. Do I identify trajectory? Now, this, by the way, means that the global destruction risk potential, and there are many other things that show that they noted that, is beyond incredibly high. Why? If, let's say, to have the aftermath of war, what was needed was to give women the right to vote. 2 generations of men and women die. Rockefeller says, okay, I can tax 2 people, why not tax 2 people? At anyway, both of them work, so we'll pay the labor of that other person, then we tax them. We can build infrastructure with that, we can build Epstein rings with that. Now what was missing? What's the thing that antidotes the orgasmic birthing lineage? Yeah. What does it antidote? anything that Pluto in the fifth house of Israel is about to expose in the coming 20 years. I do not make the rules, I just read the chart. Such a such a Dutch thing to say. But this is, and now we're asking for something that, or what is we're asking? The chart is asking to appease Beta per se in 2030. What would that mean? Now, let's say I had to convince an organization prior to Uranus Gemini that people are going to try to unionize and we better appease them if we want to stay in business. Now, there's a lot of monkey business going around. A lot of the abolition of slavery was simply the deportation or allocation of slavery to other countries. Now, if that business, if you show that business, and let's say, millionaires don't work with astrologers, billionaires do, so you just show them, okay, previous trends with Uranus in Gemini. If that business is a thinking business, they might try to say, oh, we can get it to, like, do you want to be Nikes? Because Nikes cut the boom. Do you want to be Ford? Ford cut the boom. They had to remediate the boom. They had to lose their credentials. They had to risk the loss of the company over something that the people that did the same thing simply were second to face the consequences. Those folks those already had the leverage to that. Do you want to be Nikes when they decided to abolish slavery? Then they look at the production of the shoes and they say, oh, the slavery Nikes. Now, that's an easier point to deliver than the point that I'm delivering. Let's say in the first collision, before Nikes, let's say somebody would try to market to Nikes, hey, we're having civil war clock, we better abolish any sort of thing that could cause laborers to unionize, even in the factories that are in Eckville. They would have a more difficult point. They would say, okay, we have abolished slavery within the United States in the past. It is true, but we didn't abolish slavery in Japan, in India. Why would we think that it will be different now? Anybody that's missing the point that I provide here free of charge. This is the type of advisory that Blackstone would take, that Bank of America would take, that the World Economic Forum would take, that the biggest military alliances would take. 1325 reiterated one of the best things that happened to NATO. Now, those within NATO that think that they can just put a statement there, and which, by the way, I know that those that put that statement there know what I'm talking about. But those around that can think, oh, well, that statement was there. Yeah, the Secretary General gave a little bit of an introduction speech. Kind of like when they tried to give those little tests in the computer that the person has to go through, like, what is sexual harassment? V, by forgetting everything. Those people are the Nikes. Not the Nikes of today. The Nikes that almost lost Nike Because he thought, yeah, we're gonna have another civil war, and then what? But the factory is there. Who cares? It's that once in a century where the broken clock is correct twice a day. Now, if you don't know that, you're calculating the moves strategically in a Kissinger way without taking into account the Nike's moment. Oh, they might have a witch hunt. Yeah, but what if it's Iceland style? Now, more trajectories that I can see. We're gonna have to see what happens at the end of July with the bulk basket on a degree 4, degree of foundation. And Jupiter is also laws, juristic revolutions. And I can only say, I said what I said. I said what I said. Now again, said now, nodes give us fated events. Um, but 2030 with Ketu Sedna, we are purging Sedna stories. We might be purging Standard Oil as an oil company. Definitely the Standard Oil strategy of wealth, because it's a trade. You're like, aren't you afraid to say that? Rockefeller probably knows. They are probably already ready and adapt. They say, Shirley, are you telling that to the board of investors? If they're willing to listen. That kind of financial advice, again, I'm not their financial advisor, and here is the thing. These are the people that I can give my astrological opinion to. Okay, why? I'm the soft skull. They are not the soft skull. The, okay, I'm that 6 years old allegory at the story about at the story of Etrusc in the movie Working Girl that came up with a solution that the board of people that are old and experienced wasn't thinking about because they weren't viewing it from a 6 years old's point of view. That is very relevant for the spirit of our times. This is why my Julie forecast 2027, I said, I'm waiting for the after 1911 moment. Um, what does it mean about the intervals? Okay, the war on oil and so on and so forth. Well, every person has their own trajectory and their own level of reference. That being said, what I said should be considered when, like, how should I say that? In the race to 2030, they don't want to end up being the Nikes. Um, with Aries, I said plan for sovereignty. With Taurus, what was it that I said? Plan for willing consent? I don't know. Or drawn consent, I get. So what do I say with Gemini? Ketu Sedna. This is powerful. We had Ketu Sedna with Taurus. The 1990, I think, 1 2 would have had Ketu Sedna. 1992 or 1993 would have had Ketu Sedna. Rahu Scorpio. We had the great immigration in the aftermath of the USSR. We had Ketu Sedna. Oh, 1990. Had a 1991 too. Oh, we had 1990. No, 1990. 99. The USSR had kaput. Now, why did it had kaput? Because where was the missing money? The dividends to the podcast of Annika Lucas is what I'm saying. Now when I mentioned that name, the money went missing. Where did the money go? What people were working for the nation, but to extortion calls. That was Ketu Sedna. They purged the USSR. People think, oh, a big operation to free the hostages for the no. Everything that was based on human trafficking collapsed. What was based on in the USSR? Um, what happened when Sedna was in Aries? Sedna was in Aries in the 1940s to some of the almost the end of the 1960s. When we had Ketu Okay, we had Rahu, how should I say, we had Rahu going from Cancer to Taurus. In the 60s. Then we had Rahu in Aries, 1949. The walk in ephemeris. um, 1949, so 9 years, it would be 1940. 9 to 12 years, so it would be 1940 to 1938. 1938. Then we would have a Ketu Aries, which would still be with Sedna. This would be the thing that would give eventually women the right to vote. Um, a woman was not written as a distinct entity for tax or registry purposes. And basically, we purged these Sedna stories of the identity of women being, we wouldn't even say subjugated, but not even existing. But this began with Adolf Hitler sending the women back to the kitchen, supposedly in the excuse of providing jobs. So it's not as clear as, let's say, the 1990s USSR drop. Then 49, because 48 Israel would have Rahu in Taurus. 49, we would already have Rahu in Aries. That would give us the beginning of, I think the beginning of the Mossad and the IDF would already be Rahu Aries. And still with Sedna, so it would be Rahu Sedna. Think about Rahu Sedna and the beginning of Mossad and IDF. Not the best. Okay, what happened with Rahu Sedna Beta per se was a spiritual warfare that was basically a trafficking campaign using dark occult and the effect of the fifth vital sign, which was another form of trafficking campaign. It is not a jab, and this is not a pipe. I have Vulcan Taurus. Oh, and and now what happened when Sedna was in Pisces? We would have to go back. I don't remember when. I don't know. Was the Bolshevik Revolution with Sedna in Pisces, like 1905? I would need to look at the like. I would actually need to open an ephemeris. So that was me being lazy. See, if you have a Taurus and you have a problem with computational force, you might get competent at computation for being too lazy to open an ephemeris to calculate it in the head. Remember the episode when I did a forecast like this? Momentary moments. Um, the members of the royal family episode is going to drop at the end of July. Yeah. Maybe I'll manage to go to the airport tomorrow to have a matcha and record August 2020 safer. Meanwhile, Marcel de Baran, a lunar return, but the moon is applying to square Saturn, so I can't have like a serious dog star talisman moment. Oh, another thing I was thinking about, how much time do I have? Not, no. Terrible question. Terrible question. I'm gonna need to do a separate episode about the situation of the Jews in the face of Islam and Christianity now, but I actually covered it with everything that I said about the core issues. So, Lilith 22 in Sag, Lilith Mula.